welcome back. Today we are talking about one of my current favorite shows. I was introduced to this show earlier this year. Well, I say earlier this year. I got an opportunity to direct a couple of scenes from it earlier this year. I actually read the entire thing, I'm gonna say late November, early December of 2019. And then in February, I was able to direct snippets of the scene for the Kennedy Center and their theater festival, their college theater festival. And now I'm talking to you all about the show. When I first read it, I was like, I don't know what in the world is going on. But as I dissected it further and really got into rehearsals with my actors about the script and what they thought of it, I was like, wow, this is the side of the story that we always needed to hear and we didn't know exists. Okay, so Amanda, what is this show? You've kept me in suspense long enough. It is Harlem Duet by Dejanay Sears, and Harlem Duet is the precursor to Shakespeare's Othello, the Moor of Venice. So just to give you a little backstory about these two shows. Othello, Shakespeare's Othello, the Moor of Venice. The story is about the rise and fall of Othello, how this man who is Black or someone of darker appearance, and how he has risen in ranks in the military and he has been passed over by Iago, a man who is like, I deserve that promotion more than Othello, and he's Black. Like, why are you giving Othello this promotion? Othello also has married a white woman in secret. And so Shakespeare's story is just navigating how Othello is dealing with all of the backlash that comes with marrying Desdemona and being high up in the military, and all of Iago's pursuits and plans to sabotage Othello, which actually, spoiler alert, work. Harlem Duet by Dejanay Sears is the precursor to Othello. And it's not set in Elizabethan period as most people set Shakespeare. No, it is set in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's actually the story of Othello's previous lover, Billy, because we're experiencing Othello through her eyes. And we watch how Othello becomes Othello that we see in Shakespeare's version. I love Shakespeare's Othello. Like, I read it for this competition for the first time all the way through, and I was like, good stuff. I love Harlem Duet because I was watching this interview with Dejanay Sears, and she was saying it's the take back of Othello. While I believe that Shakespeare's Othello, the Moor of Venice, is well written, I believe that Dejanay Sears approaches Othello with more of an honesty that's not seen in Shakespeare's Othello. I think Sears' Othello he's gut-wrenching because he brings up points about how the African-American man feels in a relationship, and it's like, wow, I definitely see that perspective. But then the way he delivers his perspective is like, oh buddy, I don't know if I can get down with you. You sound like I would never have my rights as a woman. But it's still a perspective. It's still an opinion. And that's why I wanted to talk to you all about it today, because both sides bring up a lovely view of what it means to be African American, either in this time or in a time previously lived. The question of how do you see yourself? And I know I talk about this a lot on this channel, but how do you see yourself is such an important character analysis question, because first and foremost, the actor must be on their character's side at all times. If the actor is not on their character's side, then that character will fail. And I am sorry for whoever has to sit through that performance. With Shakespeare's Othello, while I think it's well written and lovely, I really do enjoy that script. This is not me bashing Shakespeare. No, I would probably be kicked out of the theater community. I don't think he advocated for himself as hard as he could. I think with Harlem Duet, you see Billy give Othello crap for the ways that he's treated her or past transgressions. And Othello in Harlem Duet says, I'm not about to take this. And here's why. Because you yourself have your own flaws. And I tried to deal with them or navigate through them as best I could, but we could never grow. And that's one of the reasons why we're not in a relationship right now. And I thought him standing up for himself is something that I never saw in Shakespeare's Othello. It's something that I never saw in Shakespeare's Othello. And yes, there's moments where Othello defends himself to Desdemona or Iago or whoever in Shakespeare's script. But I never really felt that passion, that true angst and frustration of, you are doing this to me just because of the color of my skin. I think Shakespeare did a good job in writing how someone in Othello's position might possibly act. But I never thought he got to the core of who Othello was. I think Dejanay Sears, she got to the core of who Othello was. He was this man trying to do the best he could with what he had. And when people tried to come up against him to stop him, he was like, no, I'm not going to take this. I'm not going to take this. I'm not going to sit around and be lazy. And I'm going to choose the best path for me, even though that goes against the grain of what is expected of me. So I believe I mentioned, if I didn't, I'm mentioning it now, Othello and Dejanay Sears' Harlem Duet goes against the grain by marrying Mona, who later in Othello, the Moor of Venice by Shakespeare, becomes Desdemona, who is a white woman. He goes against the grain because he was with Billy, who was African American. I never saw Othello apologize in Harlem Duet, in the sense of apologizing for being who he is or what he wants. And I liked that. With Shakespeare, there are moments where he cowered. And while I understood that. Put it in context, Amanda. This is a black man surrounded by white people in a time where if he bats the wrong eyelash, he could go off and, be executed. But it was never, like I said, I never thought Shakespeare got to the core of who Othello was. And that's why I appreciate Dejanay Sears' Harlem Duet, because she took Othello and she wrote him from an African-American perspective. She actually wrote him from an African-American and Cuban perspective, which I was like, go ahead on. I'm here for that. I think Sears addresses something that we see happening in Shakespeare's Othello, the Moor of Venice, but your finger isn't necessarily always pointed to that direction. And it's the identity crisis happening inside Othello. And I love that she tells this story through a woman who's also suffering an identity crisis. And I don't mean just because Othello goes off and marries a white woman that he's suffering an identity crisis. No, that is not what I'm saying. I'm saying, does Othello know his culture? Does he know where he comes from? Does he embrace it? I think sometimes with Shakespeare's Othello, we don't get to see as much of who he is or where he came from. But with Harlem Duet, we get to see those roots and how he responds to those roots, and if he's actually okay with who he is as a person. We get to see it through Billy's eyes, who is also going through her own version of a dark and twisty mental breakdown. And so with that in mind, I have a couple of questions that I ask my actors throughout this process. Number one, how do you see yourself? This is the most important question I think an actor can ask themselves about their character, because with all of the attributes that character has, the actor has to embrace them. In this sense, not in real life, no, but in this sense that on stage, I can't see the fight of the actor not liking what the character is doing. Because first and foremost, the actor must be on their character's side. If they're not, I see that struggle, I see that fight, and I'm looking at an actor struggle with a character instead of a character struggling with his circumstances. Number 2, who comes first in your life? Throughout this entire show of Harlem Duet, we see Billy putting Othello at the forefront of her mind, putting Othello in every thought that she says. And it's like, girl, you have your own life. This focus you have on this man, it's called an obsession, and it's going to lead you down a dark and twisty path. Spoiler alert, it does. And I think that's because she didn't put herself at the forefront of her life. Now, I know putting yourself at the forefront of your own life is a very American-centric idea. But in this case, I really do think Billy needs to put herself first, because Othello is not with her. He's in a relationship with Mona, or Desdemona, and she needs to move forward. Sometimes men necessarily aren't apologetic in putting themselves forth or going after what they want. And I think Othello and Harlem Duet is like, look, this is what I want. This is who I want to be with. Who's going to stop me? Little did he know, when he got to Othello, the Moor of Venice by Shakespeare, Iago would stop him. Like I said, Harlem Duet is the precursor. So I smash the two together sometimes. The third question I ask my actors is, are you open to seeing past the illusion? I believe the reason Billy is so obsessed with Othello is because she can't let go of the illusion, the dream of the life they had and the life she wanted them to have. Meanwhile, Othello is like, she's seeing this vision. I don't see this rose-colored garden. I see a rose garden with so many thorns. But maybe he wasn't the best partner either. And so I asked the actors, are you open to seeing the other person's perspective? And in Harlem Duet, for a moment, it was yes. But then it became no. The characters saw the other person's point of view. They saw past the illusion, the smoke and mirrors. And they realized it was too much of a vulnerable position for them. And so they went back to the lives that they had forged without each other. Or at least Othello went back to the life he forged without Billy, and Billy continued down her obsessive path and ends up in a mental institution. Thank you so much for joining me. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.